Humans always have, and they always will, use drugs. There are records of the Sumerians, the earliest records showing the opium plant being part of their experience. We have records from ancient Chinese civilizations showing emperors recommending marijuana for possible medical use. Ancient South American populations relied on the cocoa leaf in a variety of ways. Just Say No, I actually think, is an important part of a conversation about drug use. But realistic, sensible drug policy has to confront this reality, that through history and today, humans are drug users. I say that in part because I'm a drug user. I suspect many of you are drug users as well. But you're not thinking about the bad drugs. We'll get to those in a minute. I'm talking now, and I want you to be thinking about the good drugs. The drugs I took this morning to help me with my high cholesterol, prescription drugs, the over-the-counter drugs that almost every American uses on a fairly regular basis, whether it's allergies, pain relief, whatever's necessary. I see some drugs here today in coffee cups. Caffeine is indisputably a drug, and one that we all, perhaps excessively, rely on to get through various days. And among the things I want you to be thinking about is how when a drug is being used in a relatively healthy, or at least harmless way, we don't tend to think of it as a drug. It leaves our consciousness as drug use. So that's one important sort of concept to keep in mind just in our vernacular, and as a lawyer and law professor, an important thing to think of when we use particular terms, what their meanings might connote and not connote, both socially and legally. But I also want you to think about the role that government and private industry, the marketplace, plays in facilitating healthy, or at least not harmful, drug use for these good drugs. When government is functioning well, it's integrally important for the safety of drugs, for information about drug availability, for spurring and encouraging research in a variety of kinds of ways. When companies are working well, serving the public interest effectively, they're helping make drugs accessible. They're giving us a range of choices as patients and consumers. They're also incentivized through the marketplace to innovate, to provide for new, hopefully good drugs. So there's good stories to tell about drugs and government and markets. Unfortunately, there are also some bad stories through our history. And one of the things that I do with students when I teach on these topics is go through some of the history that give us lessons as lawyers, as folks thinking about legal regulations. I love this old ad, it predates alcohol prohibition, of young child and grandfather toasting a beer as a tonic. Because we think at times, and my students especially, knowing the history of alcohol prohibition, think of that as a story of government gone bad, preventing us from accessing a certain kind of drug that many enjoy in recreation. But there was a market story before that that was part of the spur to the government response in the form of alcohol prohibition. Many of you are likely familiar with the Joe Camel figure, a notorious figure in marketing tobacco to young people. Lots of evidence showing the way in which that form of marketing addicted people before they were at an age to really think about the consequences of that activity. And then I've got some just little chart there about the overprescribing of opioids. There's a very complicated story. It would be another couple lectures to talk through the way both market and government dysfunction has played a role in our modern opiate epidemic. Though I want to emphasize in this context especially what's known in the literature as the iron law of prohibition, that bad government in the form of prohibition oftentimes can lead to even worse markets, black markets that reduce the size and the potency and then ultimately the danger of certain drugs. So as you hear about fentanyl as our new scourge and these other forms of opiates that have been so deadly, it's itself a product of markets and governments working poorly. I give all that history because for me, the project I've been working on, the project I've been thinking a lot about lately, is what are the lessons of this history in the arena of marijuana? Arguably, from a legal perspective, the most dynamic, and I think problematically the most understudied area of legal change that we're experiencing right now in the United States. You see on this chart a representation of the 30 states, Ohio is included, that have moved from blanket marijuana prohibition to allow some medical marijuana use. We've got 9 states now. Famously, Colorado is the first to get a marketplace going. California is the new big entrance with recreational marijuana being legalized. And then a number of other states that are providing for sort of lesser forms. And it's all in an effort, I think, to get away from what are right now the very salient harms of blanket prohibition for marijuana. The concern about racial disparities in arrests and incarceration for all of our drug laws, and the statistics showing that being particularly profound when it comes to our enforcement of marijuana prohibition. The creation of very dangerous, harmful black markets that often extend their reach beyond marijuana to a range of other drugs and a range of other problems. I have the capital there because I also think the harm that marijuana prohibition has done, arguably continues to do, to respect for the law. Under federal law right now, marijuana is still treated as a Schedule I drug comparable to heroin and LSD. That doesn't match the science, that doesn't match people's experiences, and as a result, it leads to, in a range of ways, with a range of consequences that are sometimes measurable, but I think often aren't, a disrespect for our law and our legal systems. Another version of government gone bad that can echo through a variety of other consequences. We're getting now such state-level reform because the potential from reform is so exciting, at least if you listen to the advocates. The advocates will say, we'll get research. All host of new drugs will come out of allowing marijuana research to be done robustly. We'll have economic development. There will be new jobs aplenty for everyone that will come from a legalized industry. And the tax revenue will come pouring in. It will fill all our potholes. It will fund all our schools. But the story from the advocates is one-sided. There are real risks. The history tells us this. Looking around at what's going on in states like Colorado and California reveals how many products now are being produced by the market, how quickly our legal change and our market change is getting ahead of the research, getting ahead of what we know and what we don't know. Driving under the influence of marijuana is one of the most profoundly challenging issues, largely because we don't even know how to measure impairment in this setting. The early research is all over the map about how much impairment's there. The one thing we know for sure, one thing that's not discussed nearly as much as it needs to be, is combining marijuana use with alcohol use makes driving under impairment that much worse. And yet that's not even the robust conversation we're getting, in part because, I will say, the governments are playing such catch-up and are in such a difficult spot. Wanted to get back to what for me is where this all cashes out for the work that I'm doing right now. I think universities, and this university in particular, are uniquely well positioned to strike that balance, to advise governments with research, with inquiry, with discussions that's not driven by the profit interests that the commercial industry, the market forces are going to have. And governments, whatever you think about them and whoever is in charge, have their own deficiencies when it comes to research and robust, innovative thinking concerning where society should be going on these critical issues. And so that's why I'm extraordinarily happy and pleased that I've started a new center called the Drug Enforcement and Policy Center that is dedicated to being an objective, research-based institute that's going to try to start unpacking these questions. And they're very hard. The last message I give to you is anybody who tells you they've got this figured out, they're trying to sell you something. Whether it's sell you a new law, sell you a new drug, this is complicated, this is hard, this is what the history shows, but this is what I'm so excited to be at this university, to be thinking about, working on, and I would highly welcome your input and help as I work through this project. Thank you very much.
One of the things that intrigues me from your message, Professor Berman, is You referenced everything from biomedical research. You're a professor of law, but you talked a lot about policy, which is not law, very different areas. You touched on sociological and even social work kinds of substance. And so is there a way that your professorship actually enables you to walk across all of these different spaces?
Absolutely. In fact, that's been one of the most exciting things about this new center that we're building at the law school is in both the request to an outside foundation and in our vision of what it can achieve, it's interdisciplinary in its very core. We have a faculty member built into the structure of the center from the John Glenn School for Public Policy, as well as our College of Social Work. And it's a recognition that not only is it impossible for any single discipline to tackle these big problems, but that one of the reasons they don't get tackled is it's challenging to work across silos, right? And that's an enduring challenge that I think all academics face. And again, I want to say that this university has been spectacular at not only fostering and facilitating that kind of interdisciplinary work, but putting it at the core of the way we think about problems.
Excellent. Thanks. Another round of applause for Professor Doug Berman.